Hey everybody, welcome to this episode of TRCOA's Behind the Groove. If you're here live, please introduce yourself and ask questions in the chat as we go along. This episode is sponsored by Stinson Recording Studios. Also, if you find this content useful, please like this video, and if you are new, please subscribe to our channel. We make new content every week. Today we are proud to have Ben Kliever. He is going to review lo-fi mixing techniques. Ben is the owner of Nebula 88 Studios and one of TRCOA's beginning recording techniques instructors. Ben will start right after our pro tip in under 5 minutes. Hey everybody, I'm John Stinson and I'm going to do our pro tip in under 5 minutes. Okay, I am going to show you guys today how to send your mix output to multiple outputs, all right? It's a pretty obviously anytime you're making a normal mix, and that's what this is, you're going to have tracks and you're going to be sending them to buses, and then those buses are going to have EQ and compression and different things like that. Of course, you'll have sends and returns and all kinds of stuff. At the end of the day, everything is going to come out of a mix bus output, which is then going to go to your main speakers, right? Well, sometimes you may want to send that entire same mix out at a completely separate output. And there's a lot of needs for that. Like, for example, in this particular case, I'm calling this one live feed. So what I'm doing in that particular case is splitting that signal off and sending it out a separate output. The exact same mix, though, the exact same sounds out to a live feed. Or you could send it out to another set of speakers or so forth and so on. So this is how you do it. Basically, in Pro Tools, when you hold the control key down, you click on this, and it allows you to select multiple outputs. And you can even select many different outputs. You can see we have a lot of different outputs in here, but in this particular case, I've named one live feed. Now, that's that. That one is set that way. Now, there's a quick and easy key command to do that. I'm going to go back and just put this in mix output. So I've already selected, but you could hold down Command and click on every single channel that says mix output, because of course that's everything that's going to your master bus. So I've got a little group here that is all my tracks that are set to mix output. I'm going to hold Option and Shift, which will affect all those tracks that are selected, and I'm going to hold down Control, and then I'm going to change the output to any one of those tracks. Of course, I'm going to select live feed in addition to mix, click off, and then boom, all those tracks are now going to the live feed bus as well as the mix bus. Okay, cool. So I hit play, and now you can see we have two separate buses. So if you had plugins or anything on this mix bus, of course you could duplicate them onto the live feed bus or the second bus that you have here as well. So if you needed a separate output to go to a separate place that sounds exactly and functions just like your mix bus, that's the way to do it. Cool. Thanks you guys for watching. Hopefully this was helpful, and we'll see you guys on the flip side.
Hey everyone, welcome back to TRCOA's Behind the Groove seminar. I'm Ben Kliever, and I will be leading you through another lesson tonight. Tonight, I'm going to be talking about lo-fi mixing, and this is going to be, an overview really of the kind of effects you can use to help achieve this sound. I'm not going to come out and say that I'm like the absolute foremost master on lo-fi mixing, but this is techniques that you can absolutely use that'll reach you to get you there. Lo-fi works in any genre. Like I know there's a lot of popular stuff right now that's lo-fi, that they'll have like their lo-fi hip hop or lo-fi beats that a lot of people are listening to, and then there's some lo-fi indie too. But technically, lo-fi is a sound, and I'm about to talk about that a little bit more, and it absolutely can apply to any genre. It's more the way that you are interacting with it. So kind of first thing, before we dive into this, I'm just going to talk to you about just lo-fi. What lo-fi is it stands for low fidelity, for those of you who don't know what that is. So low fidelity, basically what that is going to be anything that changing the sound from what we know from a high definition modern recording. So that means anything that's including us degrading the sound, where we are limiting frequency ranges, we are adding harmonics and distortion. It's something where you're almost either dirtying up or taking something away where it doesn't feel as, where it's completely high definition modern sound where you expect everything to be huge and bright, just big and bright and punchy right in your face. Lo-fi is going to be a more darker, mellow approach that you're taking to this. Now, this track we're actually going to look at is, when I initially did this track, it was not meant to, like when I initially did it and recorded it, it was not with lo-fi intentions in mind. But then I came in and went back to this and then applied some of these methods to make it sound in a lo-fi area where it would fit in that realm more. And so we're going to take a listen here in just a sec, we're going to take a listen to that. But I just wanted, for those of you, if you have any questions, obviously as we go on, please comment. If I'm going across something and you just want to see something more, please say something about that in the chat. Otherwise, I'm going to dive in and we're going to take a look at some of these main plugins and techniques that you can use to help get you to a much more lo-fi sound, even if you're using it on whole tracks or sections or parts or whatever. So let's go ahead and dive in and take a look at this session. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to have you take a quick listen just for a little bit, and this is going to be a little more muffled and darker than, like I said, than what this was initially intended to be. Pretending to love only me. Your Mona Lisa smile. You're driving around all day. I made it just a half a mile. In days like these, just kind of pop in the chorus. Leaving here, looking back, headed out on that one-way track. No idea. Cool, so that's just kind of taking a little bit of listen to this track. So it's kind of like I took like a kind of more like 90s alternative kind of rock track and made it a little more lo-fi, and we'll talk about some of these effects. I mean, obviously you can go as deep as you want to degrade the sound or as little as you want to degrade with these. So I mean, I'm kind of in a middle ground here where it's not completely out of control. But let's go ahead and let's start taking a look at some of the moves that we're first going to start looking at on here. So with stuff like this where we're going to be using big effects like over a bunch of sections, I think this is where we've talked about before, for those of you who, like when we're talking about our routing, this is where having our main buses that are set up to run instruments, which if you have any questions about setting that kind of stuff up, you can go check some of the older videos where I have a whole lesson where I go over setting up buses and routing and making sure you can set it up between drums, bass, guitar, vocals, so you can easily have manipulation to all the tracks at one time. So that's usually a really good place to start. So as I said before, what we're going to start with is we're going to start with the drums and take a listen here. So this is where, let me turn off a few of the effects that I have going on this so we can kind of see where they're starting, and then we're going to kind of lo-fi these drums out from where we had them. So here's So we got some drums coming through here where I still have some standard stuff. Now I do have processing and stuff going on here that, like I was saying, like if you're starting with this, I would kind of set my effect of how I want the drums to sound with what you're doing on that bus, and then go back, and then you can really individually dial in the tracks underneath that bus to get the sound of where you want everything to be sitting at. So first thing we're going to talk about here is we want to be adding harmonics to stuff. So those of you who don't know what a harmonics is where we're taking like the fundamental note that's like the main bass, like the main low end of the main point of any source that's in your mix or any source that you have recorded in the track, and just lost my train of thought there for a second. And then like as you add either saturation, distortion, overdrive, anything that's adding that kind of grit, what it's doing is it's building harmonics down the line where it's going to be adding extra fundamental, like extra harmonics past that, which is our notes, which starts filling up and makes your sound thicker and grittier and taking up a little more space. So the first thing we have going on here is I have my kicks and just my standard kit. So the first thing is just I want to get some of the tape machine in here, and I want to push it. I'm pushing it pretty hard. You can see like I'm trying to, with this stuff, I'm trying to actually make this affect this more than just be like a subtle thing. It should be like, it still may be subtle, but it's meant for you to be able to hear more of the effect of what's going on. I mean, you can already hear how much thickness in the low end that's starting to add. Anytime you're trying to add beefy low end, which a lot of times in the lo-fi stuff, we're definitely trying to get like a kind of more like blown out kick, and we're going to dive into the kick here in just a second. But I'm using 15 IPs on this tape here, and the 15 IPs, just so you know, like it adds a little more noise in here, which is great for lo-fi because we're literally trying to add noise into something that may already be clean, and that's kind of part of it, is to make it sound a little older than it is. So 15, but it also holds the low end together more, so it's going to be more low end stuff. Now you'll also look and notice in here, like a lot of times when we come standard on this is where these things are going to be. And I'm not trying to reduce noise on this right now. Like I kind of want this stuff to be kind of noisy and act like an old stuff. So I'm pushing my noise reduction up. I'm moving my flutter just a little more. That's just going to make it just a little bit more like wobbly. So I'm kind of just adding a little bit more than that. Like if you don't want to, like even on this, I might turn the hiss off, the hiss auto mute. So usually tape machine is just the first thing that I'm going to be throwing on, especially something I'm trying to make lo-fi because we're trying to get it a little more analog sounding too. So that's usually the first thing I'm going to throw on any of these, on a lot of these buses, and just happens on drums. I'm actually running these into individual VCC channels, but we'll do those as well. So now the next thing that we have these drums going, and I got a little harmonic action going on here, is I have an EQ, and this is going to be one of the big things in lo-fi, is really controlling our top end up here, because if you notice when you're like in that genre, it's not, everything's not super bright up there, and sparkly is what I would say it's not. It's more chill and a little bit easier to just take in. So controlling where you have, what we call this is band pass, because you have a low pass and a high pass, so the only thing coming through is what's in between both of them. But with this scenario, I like setting them up both as having an option where I can move them by themselves. So let's just kind of listen to this over here. I'm going to turn these inward and see how much of a difference this makes. So like basically kind of what I'm doing with this when I'm listening with these band passes, like especially with the high cut filters with this, is that I'm going purposely really far and then going purposely the other way, and it's kind of like almost I want to pull it back until I'm feeling exactly like where it actually, on this I'm actually wanting it to start to change the sound, and that's almost what I'm listening for, is when first I want to kind of take off all that sizzle up there. So now we're getting into the limited frequency ranges. So now it's just not quite as bright, where we're not going to have all this high end going on in there. And that's just a great starting spot already, is that we have. And then I just have a compressor running after that, like normal, where I'm tapping it just a little bit. So we'll come back and we'll talk about this here in just a moment too, just because we're going to have a little more fun with the Sans amp here in a minute. Now, since we're talking about drums and we're talking about tape machine and adding saturation on that, now we're going to go in. I just want to look at the kick and the snare. Like the other stuff, when you're dealing with hi-hats and overheads and rooms and that stuff, like if you feel like that any of that high-end stuff is starting to still cut through even though you have a high cut on your bus, then that's when you want to go in and do your individual EQ shaping on individual tracks. And that's most likely going to be you pulling something away from the high end. So, but now let's just take a look at the kick, because this is just with whatever genre it is, if it's lo-fi hip hop or lo-fi just chill beats or lo-fi indie stuff, it's like the kick is kind of blown out. And what we mean by blown out is that it's going to be a little flappy and kind of have a little bit of like a plume, like a little boom, a little puff as it comes out. So let's take a listen to this kick just where it's sitting already. It kind of already has that feel a little bit. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up Decapitator here. You can use, there's a lot of different distortion plugins. You can use Decapitator, just happens to be one of my favorite. We're going to look at some other ones here in a moment where I actually use some pedals from the amp sims and different ones, so you can have different options when you're going in to pick these effects. So now we're going to listen to what this is doing here. You can actually see like I'm adding thump and drive, and so I kind of want to get this to this kick to be bigger than what it is on purpose in this. So. See there, it's like way too far. We like lost the kick completely. But you hear now, we get that really big kind of bump whenever when that's kicking in there, and that gives it that more kind of like blown out effect. And that's really, I'm doing that on purpose, 'cause that's what I'm trying to reach. And then just with some of that, I felt like it was adding a little bit of, whenever I was mixing this earlier, just felt like it added a little too much thwack in one little spot. So I just wanted to control it just a little bit more. And then the same thing when I add in the when I add in the sub kick, which is just my low end with my kick out mic here. So that's a little more than I want. I'm going to pull that back just a tad. I think that's, let me listen to the sub kick right quick. Let me pull back on that high end a little more. I'm just hearing a little bit more fuzz than I want. This is something to always pay attention to your mix wet knob and this. Now same thing kind of on this, so like I'm controlling that a little bit more, even on this kick too, just so you know, like I actually went in and controlled more of the high end than I normally would, because I'm not trying to have a bunch of that click going on in there. And that's just what I'm looking at when I'm going in with kicks. And it just really tightens up my kick really quickly on that. Now the other front here, when I'm listening to my snare, with that, I just kind of wanted to get a little more darker, and so now when I add that Decapitator in there, I got a much darker sound. So now when I have my full kick in there, so now we got a more kind of blown up drum set, definitely more lo-fi, definitely more kind of wrecked a little bit. So now, before we go into, we'll go look at some of the other, while we're sitting here, we'll just kind of look at some of the other stuff that you can do to blow up a drum kit a different way. So on that front, I was kind of doing that individually on these little kicks, on these kicks where I was, and the snares where I'm blowing them up a little more. Now you can actually, this is actually a fun thing to mess around with on your drums. You can use a Sans amp on these, and they'll actually completely like change how you want the drum set to sound. So this is something you can absolutely mess around with a lot. So let's kind of listen to what this sounds like when I bring a Sans amp in on my drum kit here. So we can really get a ton of dry, and on this one you can see I literally took a preset here and started with dirty drums. I always usually move it just a little, like a good spot, but you can, you know, open these up. But you can see how much like the room it's pushing and how much more drive. Like, so if we're really trying to get that more blown up sound where it's getting really big, then this is a really fun one to mess around with on drums, is going in and getting our And, you know, that could be something where maybe, you know, we decide that, you know, I just want to, you know, automate it in one little section. If we had, like on this one, unfortunately, really, like this song doesn't have like a pre-chorus that like builds straight into it. But if you had like a little transition section in somewhere that's a little bit different, you might be, you know, you could drop that in and just have it kick on. And then you have, you know, and then it can drop right back into what you had before. So that is one way we can go about this. And then now we'll go into some of the other stuff we can do with these instruments. So usually as I'm going up on this from here, I have my drums, and then I'm usually going to bring in my bass after that fact. Which on the bass, I'm not going to change a whole lot of how I'd normally approach a bass, besides that I want to make this a lot darker than it normally is. So here's my. Back to the verse here. And I'm just listening to this with my drums. Like on this one, I decided with how thwacky my kick was that I did want to do a little cut down here, just right where my kick was actually coming through. But sometimes, like in lo-fi, you don't have, like that's not always a thing. It's just, I just felt like they were fighting too much. But this is a genre where you can kind of let the bass kind of, you know, homogenize together a little bit, and just kind of, like the bass and the kick can be a little more like on top of each other, as long as it's still pleasing. Everything we still want to do is to try to keep stuff sounding pleasing, even though that we may be disrupting and like, even though trying to degrade and make it sound crazier. But And I'm using the Sans amp on this bass as well. I love using the Sans amp for preamp stuff. On this one, I have the buzz kind of high because I like, again, I'm kind of making it flutter where it sounds pretty, where it has that kind of, that's this buzz going on up there. Which I think it just gives a cool effect for how it's sitting on there. And besides going through and driving this stuff and taking off some of the highs, which through these, this other stuff I'm more pushing like I would normally mix, and then I'm adding in the VTM kind of at the front here. So like really what we're looking at is the main areas. So EQs are going to be the big thing, controlling our high ends, using distortion, overdrive, saturation, tape plugins, and then we're going to look at some bit crushing stuff here in just a moment that is fun for that kind of stuff. So now that we got our kick and our bass going here, where they got a nice low end going. Now we're going to start bringing in kind of our next stuff, which is going to be our guitars. And on this song, we happen to have a electric and an acoustic. And so this is where I'm really trying to like dirty some of this stuff up, like where it feels more like where it's just not as clean. So like starting wise, a lot of this, I believe I added this part here. So like starting wise, you know, my acoustics were pretty bright. Then I was coming in, just taking off a little of the high end and just pushing, like, so there's just still a little bit of air on here, but this is where we can kind of get fun and dirty stuff up too, is like you can actually use overloud. Don't be afraid to go into overloud and not use an amp. You can use actually an amp head if you want to affect stuff more too. But on this, I just happened to go into like my overdrive pedals, and we're gonna look at another one on the electric guitars, but I have the BD2, which is modeled after the Boss Blues Driver, and I'm just kind of bringing that in with my So it's just really darkening that. I'm giving it a little drive, but not enough where it's just completely blown up. And then instead of being super bright, I'm darkening it just a tad. So that's my acoustic. On the other side, we have some electric rhythms too, where I'm doing a very similar type thing now, where I'm gonna cut this out a lot. And let me just make this where you're hearing them both for a second. So then I'm adding this band pass to really darken that guitar up, which on this one, I just pulled it where I didn't feel like I lost everything and really got control of that. Now this is where I went in and used another pedal. On this, I'm running these through. This is the Diode 250, which I believe is after the DOD plugin. Yes, there it is. So when I turn that on, just giving us that kind of little grit. Some of it's even giving me a little bit squeak sometimes, which in this scenario kind of just happened to be how I have this one set up. I have, because it's more of an open song, we have like acoustic on one side, and I have like
all day. I made it just a half a mile. And days like these.
Cool. So far you've seen most of this, and again up here on my, I should have talked about these other ones up in front because we were talking about more of those other ones, but again, I'm trying to get everything to feel warmer in this is what my goal is. So like even on my acoustic bus, I mean my electric bus and my acoustic bus, I'm using the RC tube setting here, so it's running through tube console, so it's running through a more tube console emulation, so it's giving it more warmth and kind of beefing up the low end a little bit more, kind of pushing that. And then again, I'm using my tape machines, and I'm pushing some of this other, turning some of the auto mute off and some of the other settings. But I'm always
Pretending to love only me.
These are all things that are going to help make that grit come out even more. So now as we look into the vocal, and then we'll look at kind of the final stuff on the mix bus here. So vocal wise, when this started, this was a very clean vocal.
Pretending to love only me. You Mona Lisa smile.
And so on this, which is where I'm taking the mix right now, I just kind of, I want to get it darker and more gritty. And on this, I kind of wanted to take it a little extreme. So again, I put a band pass on here, really took off some of the high end of this stuff.
Pretending to love only me. You Mona Lisa smile. Pretending to love only me.
As you can see, again, like what I was talking about on lo-fi stuff, it's limiting frequency ranges. That's just part of mixing in this kind of style of this stuff. So that's what I'm really trying to do is control it where it makes it sound like it's not what you're normally listening to, but still all the elements are there. You can hear them and you know what it is. It's just not in what your normal high capacity mode is. Now, this is where I started having some fun with this guy's vocals, because I wanted to make this stuff feel very, I wanted to make it feel way more pushed, which on this front, we're gonna bring it in.
Pretending to love only me with your Mona Lisa smile.
So that's adding a little grit now. Then I really wanted to get it pretty wild and if you throw in the punish here, that's something I really pushed.
Pretending to love only me with your Mona Lisa smile.
And you can hear now we're kind of getting that kind of blown up radio voice. And if you notice here, something that's really big on all these, if you're using this stuff directly on buses, which I could have easily used this on a parallel send if I wanted to keep it more clean, but I kind of wanted this to affect the whole vocal, so I left this on here, and I'm doing the parallel part just straight here on the track. So it's just like, as if I was 100%. It's just way, it's just way too much, right? So I'm really trying to blend it in where it...
Pretending to love only me with you.
Where it's controlled and it's not completely just losing it. So now that I have that in there, now you can hear it with the music where it sits in there kind of with these.
Pretending to love only me with your Mona Lisa smile. You're driving around all day.
So it really gives us those type of vocal feels, especially in those open parts. Once it kind of jumps to the chorus, it doesn't feel quite as.
Leaving here, looking back, headed out on that one-way track.
Still feels, you can still feel that the grit's there, but it's not. Since it's not as open as like the verse is, where you can really hear.
Pretending to love only me.
Which makes that really stick out. So now, again, limiting frequencies, doing our distortion, gone through our drums, our bass, our guitars, we've looked at our vocals here a little bit on controlling their ranges and then adding a distortion and effects to those. Now, looking at our mix bus here, which is our overall, this is a thing I'm gonna turn on here in just a second because as I was talking about before, this whole time we've been adding beef, we've been adding grit, we've been limiting our frequencies, we've been adding more distortion, so we're having more harmonics go up through here, so it's just starting to feel like a thicker, darker mix. Same thing on here, so I always love using virtual mix bus when I'm on my mix bus here. So again, I'm running this through tube.
Pretending to love only me with your Mona Lisa smile.
Which kind of rounds out some of the harshness that we're getting from all the different grit and harmonics and distortion. You can add clicks and pops, like if you want to go through on that. I mean, I haven't done a bunch of stuff where I'm bringing it. I know there's literally straight up plugins that you can pull right on. I know Waves has one. I know Isotope, I believe, has one too that literally emulates clicks and pops like John here is asking about, that makes it sound like it's either a vinyl, like kind of popping on there with like the needle, but you can actually add some, and you're gonna hear some of this, like some of this clicks and pops stuff you're gonna hear. I'm gonna go into the Bit Crusher and show y'all another stock one as well that comes with Pro Tools that you can mess around with that kind of stuff. But yes, so if y'all ever hear like a modern song and it sounds like it's like a needle bouncing on a vinyl record, it's because they're using an emulation plugin that makes it sound like it's doing that, and they're choosing to do that on purpose so it feels like there's actually clicks on there. And we'll see if we can emulate that a little bit from the Bit Crush kind of scenario on there. But yes, that's something I have done before if you're trying to make something sound more like especially if you're trying to make it sound more dated than it is, or that it came from like a different older era.
Pretending to love only me with your Mona Lisa smile. You're driving around all day. I made it just a half a mile.
And at that point right here, I wanted to keep, besides controlling my low end, which I always tell you, like on rock stuff, I always like being around 34, 35 hertz. On EDM and hip hop stuff that's super bassy, and like always cut out below, I mean, you should always be cutting out below 20 hertz basically, just so it's not just going out of control and you have control of your bass. So I'm just controlling the low end, and I'm letting the high end kind of stay out of the way right now, unless I feel like there's something I need to go back and do. But I'm going to control that a lot more as we get farther down this chain here. Then I was going through and ended up on this front.
Pretending to love only me with your Mona.
Didn't want to use the FG Gray in this scenario just because it usually brightens things up just a tad, which is why I love it on modern rock stuff and anything modern. I love the FG Gray, but in this scenario I didn't. Now the FG Red's just nice and punchy, so that's kind of just the first one that it's tapping, and then running it through the Mu here, which is a tube, is going to give us more of that analog kind of feel. So let me just kind of, you can just kind of hear.
Pretending to love only me with your Mona Lisa smile. You're driving around all day.
It's just, you know, it pushes everything forward a little bit, and also gives us a little more of that grittiness from those from those other grit, from the other plugins that are on here. And then on this front, I am using the Revival harmonic exciter, which again, we've been trying to do harmonics a lot here. And I'm not pushing the shimmer at all because I'm not trying to bring up any of that high stuff in this type of mix. That's what I'm going for on purpose. I'm really just adding thickness in the low end down here. So that I'm adding more of that here. Now this is where we're gonna really make a big difference, and this is where you can really kind of get in and make a lot of, change some of the noise. This is stuff where you can have really good, like, fun with, like, again, with transitions or just automating one little section to make it sound like it's bit crushed. But we're gonna look at this. This is the Kilohearts Bit Crush, and we'll look at another one that we can use. So any of y'all that have Slate's Kiloheart bundle, this bit crusher is in there. And what a bit crusher is it's basically you can control the sampling, so you can downsample and make it sound really, really degraded, or you can add noise back into it. And that's what we're gonna do with this. So let's just take a look at what we kind of got on our bit crush here. So this is bits. The main things are gonna be like our bits and our mix, and now this one actually has a few more controls. So we have our bit that got sample level basically right here, and then this is the control of the low end of what's being what's happening with the bit crusher, and then this is the control of the high end. So I've had this on the whole mix, so it's kind of control. Like, listen to what this does where I have it set already just to the high end and how the brightness is. Just really pulling in a lot of that high end, so it's like it feels like it's more in a smaller space, which is something I'm trying to do as well. But if you notice, I'm really controlling a lot with the mix because I'm gonna make the mix really high now, just so you can hear what happens when you bit crush stuff. So when you're at the full bits here, you're gonna hear everything normal. But as I start going down, it's gonna start desampling it. So you can literally completely crush something all the way to the effect, to the point that it's just completely like distorted and like unlistenable to. But this is something you can have fun too with, like as like a very controlled with like an automation at the end of something, like where you're fading out or want to go to a section where it feels like something is being destroyed as it. So what I want to do here is I want to find this as an area where it's not completely destroying the sound, because this is on my master. I want this to be, I want to still hear everything that's going on, but then we're going to dial it in with it. So I wanted to go on purpose till I hear that white noise, because that's what I'm wanting to listen for. And then I'm going to use this mix knob to dial it in where it's in the background, but and you can still tell there's noise, but it is not what you're hearing overall like you do now. And so now we feel like we're really in a lo-fi, darker zone. I just want to make sure everything was on those kind of things. So now let me show you, if anyone has any questions, please ask. Now I'm going to show you, like, like if you didn't want to use this, that John was asking, do you ever use the Avid lo-fi plugs? I was literally about to pull out a lo-fi.
You're driving around all day. I made it just to have a mind.
So I don't want that to be that affected from these, but you can see, like, you can really drive in cool, like the exact same effects I'm doing with the Decapitator. You could get very close with this lo-fi by just using a bit of the distortion and the saturation on there as well. And then we do have a noise plug-in, right, like a noise knob right here, which lets us dial in just the exact amount of noise we want in this background as well. So you can hear how extreme it is. And then if we wanted to bit sample it, like decrush, like crush it. So there's your bit sampling kind of area right there that you can really go into, and you can even use this sample rate to pull frequencies out, because I'm almost just this could be just mixing ideas. The second that you hear that, you know, this is something that would be very cool to use as that you could automate and use as a filter on something. And have you, like, you know, build up right into something and drop right into there. But you can see, so you do have this option as well built right here into Pro Tools with these Avid plugins. I think there may be another one. Let me just, I think it's part of the Air Music technology. I'm pretty sure there's a lo-fi one there. There is. So you have another option here again, like you're seeing the same effects: sample rate, bit depth, mix. So this one too, with the Avid one, this one does give you the option to mix what's on there. You have distortion, you have envelopes, you have LFO. So you can, we have multiple ones of these that are built in here. So you can, you know, really go in there and get the bit crusher. So it's like we just want to use very small amounts of this kind of stuff, and then. But on this one, I just like, choice-wise, I ended up liking the Bit Crush from Kilohearts the most. So this is a bunch. So we went over a lot of different options as what you can use through lo-fi techniques. So the biggest, like some of the biggest effects, if you're your frequency range wise, and then whenever you are, then you want some type of distortion, overdrive, saturation, tape saturation, like, because we're trying to bring out harmonics, trying to add some effects to that, make it a little grittier, a little darker. And then outside of EQ and effects, using bit crushers or lo-fi saturation or any of these lo-fi effects that allows us to desample and degrade it, gives us that very, gives us that very old feel where we feel like we have taken the sound from being super clean to being dirtied up and being a little wild. So overall, that is low fidelity mixing, which again, lo-fi is just anything that is not modern hi-fi. So feel free to use this on any of your projects that are leading you in that direction, no matter what style of music or genre you are using. Think about these techniques to start messing around with them and using them. And then the more that you mess with what you can do with these, and the more you kind of automate with some of these things too, the more you can get some really cool effects and transitions as well. Thanks everyone for watching. We will see you next time, and y'all have a great rest of the week. Later.
Thanks everybody for watching. If you found this content useful, please like this video. It will tell YouTube to show it to others. If you are enrolled, please go to the Seminars tab on the my.trcoa website and take the quiz over tonight's lesson. And if you need to book one-on-one time with an instructor, text 512-231-0344. If you aren't enrolled, go to trcoa.edu to find out more information about what we do. Also, please post in the chat subjects you'd like to see for our upcoming live streams. And as always, subscribe to our channel, and we'll see you guys on the flip side. Bye, everybody.